Today, we're going to learn how to get started making a simple to-do list app on Android. This is going to be the first video in a short series, and we'll begin by learning how to use the Room database library from Android Jetpack. Let's get started. We'll begin by talking about the MVVM design pattern we'll be implementing and why. Then we'll set up a simple starter project that we'll be improving upon within each video of this series. And finally, we'll add Room database, which is a data persistence library from Android Jetpack. There are timestamp links in the description if you'd like to skip to the implementation section of the video. When building an app or a program, you often have to deal with two things: data and how it's displayed to a user. An MVVM is a software architecture pattern that allows you to keep those two jobs organized and separate from each other. This makes your code easier to understand, maintain, scale, and test. MVVM consists of the following three layers: the view, the view model, and the model. The model is your data. In our case, it's going to be our database with our list of to-dos, but in other apps, it can be a repository of user data, recipes, or photos for a gallery app. The view layer is what the user interacts with, and it's what displays our data from our database, in our case, our list of to-dos, to the user. Finally, our view model is the bridge between the two. It takes the data from our model layer, our database, and prepares it in a way that the views can understand and display. Then, when the user interacts with the view model decides what changes need to be done in the model, such as updating the list of to-dos in our database. Let's begin by creating a brand new project with an empty activity, and we'll give it a fun name, like important to-dos. Next, we can open up our project's build.gradle file, and here we'll declare two variables to hold the lifecycle version and room version. Now we can open the app build.gradle file, and we will add the capped plugin to our list of plugins, and we will enable DataBinding within a build features block. We'll scroll down to our dependencies section, and here we can paste dependencies for lifecycle view model, lifecycle live data, room dependencies, and room KTX, which is a set of extension functions to provide coroutine support within Room. Now we can go ahead and fix any outdated dependencies in our build Gradle file. And let's sync the project. And let's also run it to make sure everything is wired up correctly. Awesome. Now let's work on our user interface, and we'll begin by adding a blank fragment. This will just name it our to-dos fragment. And we can go ahead and delete most of this boilerplate code, which we won't be using in our project. We'll just leave the onCreate view. Now let's switch over to our fragment to-do XML, and we will convert it to a data binding layout. And this will give us access to our binding object here within our fragment. We can go ahead and declare our binding object in our fragment with a backing property. And we can update our onCreateView method to inflate the fragment using the binding object. And lastly, we'll just return binding.root. Great. Now we can switch back to our fragment layout file. Let's go ahead and switch our frame layout to be a linear layout. And we'll go ahead and move our tools context over to the layout tag. And we can set our linear layout to have a vertical orientation. Let's delete this comment. And now let's add an edit text. Set it to match parent and wrap content. And we'll set the hint to enter a to-do item. This is where we're going to enter titles for our to-dos. We'll set the input type to text. Let's add an ID. This is going to be our to-do title. And now we can go ahead and add a button so we can save our to-dos. Let's set our width and height to wrap content. We'll set the gravity to center it on our screen. And we'll set the text to something like save to do. And we'll give it an ID, like to do save button. Great. Now down here, we're going to reuse this text view. This is where we're going to display our to-dos. So we'll just name it to-dos list. And let's delete this placeholder string. All right, let's switch over to our activity main file. And we're going to convert this to a fragment container view so that it displays our fragment. Let's delete this text view and change our constraint layout to a fragment container view. We just need a self-closing tag here. We'll delete this extra namespace that we don't need. We'll give it an ID, fragment container view tag. We'll set the padding to 16 dp. And we'll make sure the name is pointing to our to-dos fragment. Now when we run the app, we can see our fragment now displays within our activity. Awesome. Now we can move on to working on our model layer, and we'll start by defining a data class that we will use to create our to-dos in our database. So here we'll define the different properties that each to-do item will have. So we'll have an ID, and we'll set a default value of 0. We'll give it a title, set that to an empty string, and we'll also add a Boolean value of whether it's completed or not. We'll set that to false by default. Now we need to tell Room how to use this data class. So we'll give it an annotation of entity. And here we can define the name of the table. We'll name this one To-Dos Table. Now, in order for Room to identify each unique to-do that it creates, it needs a primary key. So we're going to set our ID as the primary key, and we'll set it to auto-generate true, which will let Room generate a new ID for every to-do that it creates. We can also override the default titles that get created using the column info annotation. And using the name property, we can just define the actual title that we would like the column to have. So here we could say to-do title, but this is only really necessary if you want the titles of the columns to be different than the names of the properties that you have. And so that's it for our to-do entity. And now we can go ahead and work on our data access object, or DAO. And we'll do this by creating a new interface, which we'll name To-Do's DAO. And here we'll define all of the different methods that we'll use to interact with our database. So we'll define an insert method that takes a to-do item. We'll also add an update method. Delete method. A get method, so we can give it an ID of a to-do item and it'll return that particular to-do as a live data. And we'll define one to get all of our to-dos, which will return a live data list of to-dos. And now we'll need to annotate this with the DAO annotation to let Room know that this is the data access object. And we'll also use the annotations from Room for insert, update, delete. And for these get methods, we'll need to do a query annotation. And here we can provide an SQL statement. So we'll say select everything from our to-dos table. We'll give it the table name. We'll say where the ID property is equal to the to-do argument that we just passed. And we'll do the same for the get all, but here we'll say select everything from to-dos table. The asterisk is the wildcard character, and we'll say order by ID descending. And as you can see, we used our table name from our entity and the ID property as values inside of our SQL query. Great, let's close this up, and now we can begin working on the database. So we'll create a new class. We'll name it our To-Dos database. And this is going to be an abstract class, which we will annotate as database. And inside the parentheses, we can pass in our To-Do class inside of an array. This is the entity we declared earlier. We'll also set the version of our database to 1 and export schema to false. We can set export schema to true if we ever want to keep track of our database history. Then we'll have our To-Do database class extend the Room database class. And we'll also give it a reference to the data access object. We'll add a companion object, and inside we'll declare a private variable that we'll call instance. This will just hold a reference to the instance of our database, and we'll set it to null by default. We'll annotate it as volatile, And now we'll create a getInstance method, which we'll use later to create instances of our database. This method will take a context and will return an instance of our ToDo's database. We'll open a synchronize block, and here we'll just create a local instance variable, and then we'll check if our instance is null, and if it is, then we will assign it an instance of our database. So we'll start with our room database builder. We'll give it the application context. We'll tell it to create an instance of our ToDo's database class, and we'll give our database a name. And then we'll just call build, and then we'll assign this new instance to our instance variable, and we'll return that instance. Sweet. Now let's get to work on our view model. We'll name it ToDo's ViewModel. We'll extend the ViewModel class. And this ViewModel is going to have a reference to our DAO. And we'll add a variable for new ToDo titles. We'll also add a addToDo method. And here we'll create a new ToDo item. We'll set the title to the new ToDo title. And we'll tell our data access object to insert this ToDo into our database. Now, database operations can sometimes be slow, so we're going to need to use coroutines. And so we will annotate our insert, update, and delete methods in our DAO with suspend. Notice that I'm not annotating the two query methods, and this is because they use live data. And because of that, they run in the background automatically, so we don't need to mark them as suspend. And then inside of our addToDo method, we will launch a ViewModel scope. And here inside this coroutine scope, we can move our steps to create a new ToDo item. Now, because our view model takes an instance of the DAO as an argument, we're going to need to create a ViewModel Factory. So we'll create a ToDo's ViewModel Factory class. We'll extend ViewModelProvider.Factory. And this factory will also need an instance of the DAO in order to be able to create our ToDo's view model. Now we will override the create method, and we'll change this line to return model class get constructor. We'll say ToDo's DAO class.java, and we'll say new instance with our DAO argument. And that's it for the factory. Now we're ready to link our view model to our ToDo's fragment. So inside of our onCreate view, we will create a reference to the application that owns the activity that our fragment is displayed in. So require not null this activity dot application. Then we'll get a reference to the DAO from our database. So we'll say ToDo's database. And now we'll call the getInstance method that we created. We'll pass our application context and get a reference to the DAO. Then we'll create our ViewModel Factory. So we'll say ToDo's ViewModel Factory, and we'll give it the DAO that we just created. And now we create our view model using our ViewModel Factory. So we'll say ViewModel provider, pass in our ViewModel Factory, and tell it to create an instance of our ToDo's ViewModel class. Now we can use DataBinding to bind the data properties coming from our view model directly to the views in our fragment layout file. So we'll create a variable inside of our layout file that's going to reference our view model. And we'll set the type to be our ToDo's ViewModel. And then we can have our edit text field set the value of the property new ToDo title inside of our view model using DataBinding. So we'll use this @equals and curly braces syntax, and then we'll call our view model variable, and from there we can access the new ToDo title property. And now we can go over to our fragment and use our binding object to link our fragment to our view model variable inside of our layout file. Now going back to our layout file, we will add an onClick listener to our Save To-Do button. And using DataBinding, we can trigger the addToDo method that's inside of our view model. Alright, now we can check that new records are being created inside of our database by running our app and then now we'll add a couple of to-do items. So we'll say item 1, 2, and we'll just add 3 items. And now we can go down to app inspection, and in select process, select our pixel 4. We'll double click on our to-dos table, and voila, we have the 3 items we added to our database. Alright, so the next step is to get these to-do items from our database to display as a list inside of the text view from our layout file. So first we'll go to our fragment and we'll set the lifecycle owner to view lifecycle owner. We'll go to our ToDo's view model, and here we'll get a reference to all of our to-dos using our data access object and calling getAll. But remember that getAll returns a live data list. So we are going to have to format this list in a way that we can display it inside of our views. So we'll create 2 methods, and the first will just be format to-do. It'll take a single to-do item, and it's going to give us a string in return. And here we can create a multi-line string literal with the exact format that we want each to-do item to display. So we'll say the title, completed, and the ID. And now we'll create a second method to format the list of to-dos. So this will just take the to-dos list, and it's also going to return a string. And inside we can format our to-dos list using the fold function, which takes an initial value. We're just going to give it an empty string. We will define an accumulator and a to-do item, and we'll add an empty line after each to-do item that we accumulate inside of our accumulator, and call format to-do on our to-do item. And then after our getAll, we'll use our map method, and we'll call format to-dos giving it our list that we get from our live data. Now we can go over to our fragment layout file, and we can set the value of the text view to the list of to-dos that we have in our view model. And now finally, when we run the app, we should see the list of to-do items that we added previously to our database get populated automatically inside of our text view, and any new items that we add using our edit text field also be added to our database and display within our text view. Now, well done. Way to go sticking with this tutorial. Take a bow, go out and celebrate, because you just crushed the first part of making a to-do list app. Now that you know how to use Room Database, if you need a refresher on data binding, check out my tutorial here. And please stay tuned for part 2 of this series, where we will update our app to use a recycler view. Thanks for watching.